Great.
Right.
Okay. You could bear with me just one more moment so I could pull up my PowerPoint as it was on the other computer. Okay, we'll start with a little recap so we see where we're at in the Rambam at large. We are learning the laws of Torah Study, chapter 6. The topic of today will be respect of Torah scholars and the elderly. The first of the 14 volumes of the Rambam is called the Book of Knowledge, Mada, and it has 5 subjects: foundations of the Torah, character development, Torah study, the laws of avoiding pagan practices, and teshuvah. We are on section 3, the laws of Torah study. And here we go. So there are 14 halachas in today's class, and we'll work our way through them. So as we begin, I'd like to just give a little bit of a introduction. So today's chapter is going to speak about the respect due to a Torah sage. And it's just a few thoughts before we begin. So, when we speak about respect due to a Torah sage, and we're going to see that there's quite a high level of respect that is required. So one might wonder why this is so important, meaning why is this about, being great or being respected? Surely our pursuit should be for more than just deserving respect. So to answer those questions, I want to just start with a commonly asked question is, when one sees the way that a chassid reveres his Rebbe, people have often asked, is it not over the top? After all, the Rebbe is a person in this world, and the level of respect that a chassid shows towards his Rebbe sometimes seems beyond what is reasonable. And an explanation to that is that the Rebbe, when a chassid respects a Rebbe, he's not respecting that he is such an intelligent person. He's not respecting that he's such a kind person, or that he's such a good-looking person, or that he's so dynamic or caring or giving. None of that. Those are human character traits. What a chassid respects about the Rebbe is the wisdom of Hashem that the Rebbe is imparting. That's what inspires a chassid. When he looks towards his Rebbe and he sees how the Rebbe reveals Hashem in an amazing way, meaning every one of us has a duty to reveal Hashem in this world, but sometimes our own human side gets mixed in. As opposed to by a Rebbe, hopefully the human side is not, or any self-consciousness or arrogance is not getting in the way. Rather, he is allowing Hashem to shine in this world. And that is what a chassid respects about the Rebbe. When he sees the Rebbe, he sees godliness. Not that the Rebbe is God, but that the Rebbe reveals Hashem in a much greater way than other people succeed at. And I think that that's a key point to bear in mind when we enter into this chapter, and it also relates to what you were learning yesterday. And that is that when we speak about respect, it's not about just respecting the person, but it's about respecting what the person represents. So when we speak about respect for a Torah sage, we're not talking about respecting how clever the Torah sage is, but rather they're respecting the wisdom that he has and that he is able to share. Now that said, Pirkei Avos clearly says that a person should not use the Torah as an axe, meaning that a Torah scholar should not use Torah in order to have personal profit, just like an axe makes money. A person shouldn't use his status as a Torah scholar in order to have personal benefit. And somebody who's learning in order to become a Torah sage is actually considered somebody who's learning not for the ultimate reason, for side reasons, as you've learned about. So one studies Torah not to become a Torah sage, not at all. Studying Torah in order to become a Torah sage is kind of turning it upside down, because the idea of a Torah sage is that when you see the Torah sage, you see the Torah that they're studying. It's not about the person, but it's about what they represent. And therefore, when a person studies Torah, they should study Torah in order to connect with Hashem. Now, if as a result of this, they end up being a Torah sage, then that needs to be respected because of the amount of Hashem's wisdom that they carry. But that certainly shouldn't be our goal in order to be a Talmid Chacham. Also, interestingly, Torah sage is not a precise translation of Talmid Chacham. Talmid means a student, and Chacham means wisdom. And it's quite appropriate that we refer to the Torah sage as a student of wisdom, because it's what we've been speaking about over the last few minutes. It's not about his greatness, but what he's a student of. He's a Talmid Chacham. He's a student of the wisdom of Hashem. And that's what gives him his specialty. So I think the name is quite appropriate, and it references this. So those are just a few words of introduction. Now, as we go through the laws, already yesterday you began to learn about the laws that a student should have, of respect a student should have towards his teacher. And today we will focus not the respect one has to one's own teacher, but the respect one should have to Torah sages in general. Here we go. Kol Talmid Chacham, mitzvah lahadroi. Every Torah sage, it is a mitzvah to respect him. Even if the Torah sage is not my teacher, I should still respect him. As the verse says, stand up before a elderly person, or he translates it here as a white-haired person, and respect an elder. Now, the Hebrew word is not elder as in old, or the word is zaken. And zaken, which can be translated as elderly, can also mean a Torah sage, as the sages explained, Zeh Shekana Chachma. Zaken is like an acronym for a person who has acquired the wisdom of Hashem. So even if he's a youngster, even if he's an 18-year-old, if he has tremendous knowledge of the wisdom of Hashem, then he would at some point fall into that category and would be required to be respected. We'll see, it's not about entitlements. We'll see the Torah sage should try to avoid in any way causing the people unnecessary inconvenience in respecting him. But as a people, we should certainly give that respect that is due. When is one obligated to stand before a Talmid Chacham? When he approaches within 4 cubits of him until he passes. So once he comes up to me, once he's in my immediate vicinity, approximately 2 meters, then I should get up. And once he has walked past, I will be able to sit down. Okay, now that said, there are exceptions when a person shouldn't stand. Some of them are quite self-explanatory. Other ones are interesting as well. So one should not stand before a sage in a Beis HaMerchatz, which is a bathhouse. Remember, in those days, they didn't have plumbing like we have it today. They'd have to go to a bathhouse. People generally did it once a week. The Beis HaKisei, certainly not in the place of the chair, meaning a washroom. As it says, Tokov v'hadarta, stand up and respect him, implying standing up that conveys respect. So that's category number 1 of people that don't stand if it's actually not going to be respectful. Category number 2, the ein ba'alei umaniyos, people that have a trade, meaning somebody that's working, a craftsman, is also not obligated to stand before the Torah stage while he is involved in his work. As the verse says, stand up and respect. And the rabbis deduce from here that just as showing respect does not necessarily involve a financial loss, so standing need not involve a financial loss. So even if you're not working for somebody else, where you wouldn't be allowed to interrupt, even if you own your own business, you would not be required to get up if that will mean that you will suffer a loss of income as a result. Okay. What is the source which teaches that a person should not avert his eyes from the sage so that he will not see it? Meaning, perhaps I could pretend I didn't see. I'll look the other way so that I don't need to get up, lest he be required to stand before him. The Torah says, and you shall fear your gods. And our sages say, whenever it says fear Hashem, it's talking about something that relates to our thoughts that nobody else would necessarily know. It's going on in our mind. And that's where we say we need to have a sense of fear of heaven so that we don't convince ourselves of something which isn't the case. If you see a Torah sage coming, then it wouldn't be appropriate to just turn the other way. Rather, realize that you should have a fear of Hashem and act accordingly. I'm not sure at what point it's worthy to mention, if I didn't mention it yet, that there's much discussion who falls under the category of a Torah sage. So, I mean, in one context, the Shulchan Aruch says, actually, we don't have Torah sages today. So it obviously means a person of a very high caliber, but elsewhere, the Shulchan Aruch does mention these laws, implying that they do exist. And one of the commentaries, the Shach, one of the commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch, explains that a Torah sage would be somebody who has an outstanding level of knowledge of Torah in his community. So perhaps that is a definition that one can go with. Okay, moving on to number 3. So although we've spoken about how we should show respect to the Talmud Chacham, we're going to see that the Talmud Chacham should avoid inconveniencing the people. Ein ra'ui, it is not appropriate, it is not befitting, lachacham sheyatriach es ha'am, for the sage to burden the people, and go by them, position himself before them so that they will have to stand before him. Rather, he should take shortcuts and have the intent that they should not see him, so that he will not trouble them to stand. The sages of the Talmud and others would take circular routes through the outskirts of the cities where people who recognize them would not be found in order not to trouble them. So the Talmud Chacham should actually go out of his way to prevent people from having to get up in order to respect him. We'll see soon that a Talmud Chacham may also forgo his respect. I've often had an argument with a friend of mine where I'd walk in and he gets up and I said, you don't need to get up. And he says, no, it's not about you. It's about respect for a Torah sage, to which I've always responded that the halacha is that a Torah sage is allowed to forgive of his honor. Not that I in any way qualify for that title. But we'll speak about that in a few halachas time. Somebody who's riding a donkey, or today somebody who's driving in a car, would be considered like he is walking. And so just as one would stand if a Torah sage, if a Talmud Chacham was walking past, I should also stand if he's driving past. So that's an interesting modern application. If you see a Torah sage driving past, you would also stand up. And this reminds me of I remember a few years back when I was studying in New York, we suddenly received information that the president was actually driving down the streets where we were. And we went outside to show respect. And there was a whole crowd and people all stood on both sides for that 1 second that the president drove by. This is the president of the United States. And so, you know, in the big world, everybody has the people that they respect, whether it be the president, whether it be professional sportsmen. Different people have tremendous respect. And for us, Jews, the highest level of respect goes to a person that has a tremendous knowledge of the wisdom of Hashem. So when we speak about, even if he's riding, I'm reminded of when the president was driving past, and certainly the respect required for a Talmud Chacham would surpass that. Although he didn't say you need to go out and show respect. If he's driving past, you need to stand, just to keep true to the text. Okay. When three people are sojourning together, shleisha shahaya holchim baderech. Baderech means going on the way. Harav be'emtza. The master, the Torah sage, should walk in the center, and the student of greater stature on his right, miyamidai, v'katan, and of lesser stature on his left. In the commentary, he mentions that we mentioned previously that actually one shouldn't stand directly on the side of a Torah sage. Rather, this is, perhaps we'd understand this is meaning that the Talmud Chacham would be up front, and then behind him on the right and on the left would be people of slightly less stature. Okay, now we'll speak that there are actually different levels amongst the Torah sages. We'll speak about three levels. A regular Talmud Chacham, which is already of quite some level. Higher than him would be the Av Beis Din, and higher than him would be the Nasi. So in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, when we had a Beis Din in the temple, the highest judge would be referred to as the Nasi. He sat at the head. And then second to him would be the Av Beis Din, would be referred to as the head of the Beis Din, and everybody else that followed, which would perhaps be other Torah sages. So let's see these three levels. So one who sees a sage need not stand in deference to him until he reaches within 4 cubits of him. Once he has passed him, he may sit. We learned this already previously. Perhaps the Rambam is bringing this here to contrast the regular sage to those of a higher caliber. Should one see the Av Beis Din, the head of the court, one should stand in deference to him from the time he sees him, meaning from when he is in the distance, from when one can see him, one should already stand up. He should not sit until the Av Beis Din has passed 4 cubits, which is a cubit is from there to there, which is about half a meter behind me, meaning once he's taken about 2 to 4 steps past me, he's walked those Dalet Amos that I could sit down. Higher than him is the Nasi, the leader. And Hasidim refer to their Rebbe as the Nasi. Should one see the Nasi, one should stand in deference to him from the time he sees him, as far away as he can see, and he should not sit until he has reached, the leader, the Nasi, has reached his place or has passed beyond his field of vision and is no longer in sight. So again, a regular Torah sage, one only needs to stand up when he is in immediate proximity. A Av Beis Din, one would need to stand from when he sees him until he passes. And a Nasi, one would need to stand from when one sees him until the Nasi is seated or out of sight. Should a Nasi desire to waive the honor due him, he may forego it. And certainly those of a lower caliber, as was mentioned previously. When the Nasi enters, so until now we were talking on the streets, the commentaries explain. Now we're talking about when he walks into the room. So everybody should stand up and they should not sit until he tells them to. When the Av Beis Din enters, then the 2 rows that are closest to him should stand up on either side, and other people should remain seated in their place. And when a sage enters, when he approaches within 4 cubits of anyone, the ladder should stand for him. Thus one stands and one sits until he enters and sits in his place. If it's a regular Torah sage, it kind of had to have this wave of people getting up. Whoever's right next to him would stand, and those that are further ahead or further behind would sit. So if it was a room full of people, if it was a Nasi, the leader, everybody stands. If it's an Av Beis Din, the 2 rows closest to him stand. And if it was a regular Torah sage, those that are in his immediate proximity stand. So you'd have this domino effect of, or not domino, but of people standing one after the other as he walks past them. The sons and the students of the sages, so we'll, yeah, I think this translation, I think maybe there might be a mistake here. Maybe. I think maybe it should say the sons and Torah sages, because remember we said Talmid Chacham means a student of wisdom. So I think the correction of here the translation should be the sons of Talmidei Chachamim, of Torah sages, and Torah sages themselves are allowed to jump over the heads of the people to reach their place. So let's say people are sitting in a room and it's filled with benches, and the only way he could get, it doesn't mean literally to stand on their heads. It means that he'd be able to climb over meaning that he's passing over their heads, and that would be allowed. So the Torah sage can do that, as well as his sons or his students. So maybe over here it actually does mean students, as he has translated, would be allowed to jump over people's heads in order to get to their place, as they are needed up right next to the Torah sage. It is not praiseworthy for a sage to enter the house of students last, because he's going to make everybody stand up. Or sorry, he's going to jump over their heads, one of the two. However, if he leaves to tend to his needs, then meaning if he needs the bathroom, then he can't help it. He could leave and he could come back, even though it will be jumping over people's heads. But obviously, you should try to avoid this. The children of the sages who have enough knowledge to listen to their father should face their father. And if they lack that knowledge, they could sit next to their father and look towards the people. I'm just reminded of how often in a shul, this is a little different, but there'll be a little door or next to the rabbi's place, so he can kind of come in and out over there, instead of perhaps inconveniencing people by walking down the aisles if people generally stand when he walks past. Okay. Just to mention one final point on halacha 7. However, one who is not required to be upfront dare not step over the heads of this holy nation. And that's quoting from, I think, the Gemara. Okay. Talmud shehu yoshev lifnei Rabbi Tamid. This is a very interesting one. Tamid means constant, like we have in Shul, the Ner Tamid, the constant flame. So a student that is always in the presence of his Rebbe, in the presence of his teacher, so he is not allowed to stand more than twice. Why? So that he doesn't give more honor to his teacher than to God. Quite an interesting one. Now, why twice? Because when we say the Shema twice a day, that is when we show our respect to Hashem. So his reverence of his teacher should be not greater than that of God, because after all, we said all the respect that the Torah sage has is because of his wisdom of Hashem. Okay. Number 9 is an important one. It comes almost independently of all the others. He says there is a second definition of Zakein. Until now, we've been translating Zakein as a Torah sage. But Zakein can also refer to an old man of exceedingly advanced age. Now, how old is that? Different opinions. Some say 70, some say 90. The Rambam doesn't mention an age or an exact definition. So if somebody is very old, even if he is not a sage, even a sage who is young would be obligated to stand before an old man of exceedingly advanced age. Meaning there's also a mitzvah not just to stand for a Torah sage, but for even a Torah sage to stand before the elderly. Simply to stand up. Nevertheless, he need not raise to his full height and need only show some token of respect. So he doesn't need to completely stand up, but if he kind of just goes like that, then he has shown his respect for the elderly. Even an old Gentile should be addressed with words of respect. Often Gentiles were involved in pagan practices, and we would want to avoid their cultures. But nonetheless, if he is old, he should be addressed with words of respect. A hand should be extended to support him. As the Torah says, stand up before a seva takum. Before a seva, which he translates as a white-haired man, one should stand, implying any old man, regardless of whether he is knowledgeable or not knowledgeable, whether he is Jewish, or even if he is non-Jewish, we should still, and we may not value his value system, we should respect him simply because of his age, as he has had many experiences in life, and that certainly should be respected. Okay, this is quite an interesting one. It's we see that the Torah sages are actually should not do hang amongst the people, so that they not come to just respect him, at least in manual tasks that would cause the Torah sage to lose his respect. And he is also exempted from different community taxes. Let's see that inside. Torah sages should not personally take part in any communal work projects like building, digging, or the like to improve the city, lest they become disgraced in the eyes of the common people. So maybe I would just throw it over here. Again, we're not talking about, any rabbi. We're talking about somebody who is of a Torah sage, which according to some opinions don't even exist in our generation. Others do say that it's somebody who is exceptionally knowledgeable of the Torah in his community. But, for me and you, we certainly, I remember in Israel that when the previous Chabad Rebbe, the sixth Chabad Rebbe, founded Kfar Chabad, the village. There's a village called Chabad Village, a little short distance away from Tel Aviv in Israel. And you had these Hasidim that just came out of Russia, and they were the farmers. And it was an amazing Kiddush Hashem, a sanctification of Hashem's name, when these pictures went out of these farmers with long white beards that you would imagine them to be these extremely viewed as, scholarly, pious people. And they were themselves busy harvesting the fields. And that certainly was a tremendous sanctification of Hashem's name. So this is in no way a dispensation to us regular people, but it's a person on the level of a Talmud Chacham. Furthermore, money should not be collected from them to pay for building the city wall, fixing its gates, or paying guards, or the like. Very interesting reason. It's because the Torah that they study causes them to have a, I guess, somewhat miraculous protection. And so they're actually not benefiting from these walls and guards because they have their own private protection, which is from all the Torah that they're studying. Similarly, they are not obligated to pay taxes. Oh, by the way, just to mention, the commentaries say on the first point that they shouldn't partake in communal projects. The commentaries say they should still pay for it, meaning it's still part of their responsibility. It just means that they shouldn't do it themselves so as not to lose their respect. Similarly, they are not obligated to pay taxes, neither their share in the tax levied on the city as a whole, nor a head tax levied on each individual, as the Torah says, or as Tanakh says, although they will give among the nations, now I will gather them in a little while, they will be released from the burden of the king and his officers. So we see that even, what was his name? There was a Persian king that even when he sent the Jewish people to build the temple, this Persian king actually said that those building the temple are exempt from paying the taxes. I'll come to the chat in a moment. I want to just try to cover the text since I see we're running out of time. And then I'll stick around a few more minutes for questions. Similarly, if a Torah sage has merchandise to sell, he is allowed to sell it first. So Torah sage, the Rambam mentioned previously, as you've learned, that a Torah sage is not allowed to ask to be paid for his Torah studies. So he needs to work. And if he is working, he should be given the opportunity to sell his merchandise first. Nobody else should sell until he has made his sales. Similarly, if he has a legal matter and stands among other litigants, he is given priority. Also, he is allowed to sit. This certainly doesn't mean priority over his the person that's taking him to court. The judge needs to judge them equally. It means if there are two cases that can be judged, then one would and they're of equal standing, and the judge can choose which case to judge first, then he would judge the case of the Torah sage first. Okay. There's a great sin to disgrace Torah sages or to hate them. Jerusalem was not destroyed until its inhabitants disgraced its sages, as implied by the Tanakh, and they would mock the messengers of Hashem, despise his words, and scoff at his prophets, i.e. they would scorn those who taught Hashem's words. Similarly, the Torah's prophecy, if you despise my statutes, should be interpreted not just in if we despise Hashem's laws, but also if we despise the people that teach those laws. Anybody who does disgrace the Torah sage does not have a portion of the world to come, for he has disgraced the word of Hashem. Let me try to move very quickly now so that we can try to fit as best as we can into our time frame. I see it is already 12:30, so if you need to go, I understand. If you're able to bear with us another 2 minutes, that would be great. But if you do need to go, then please take your own time to read the rest of the text it is on the link that has been shared. Even though a person who disgraces a Torah sage will not receive a portion of the world to come, if witnesses come and testify that he has disgraced the Torah sage, even if it was only verbally, he is obligated to be placed in a nidui under a ban of ostracism, to be somewhat excommunicated. This ban is publicly announced by the court. Also, wherever he is located, he is fined a litra of gold, which is given to that sage, a monetary penalty. Even one who disgraces a sage after his death, somebody who disgraces a sage after the sage passed away, is also placed in under a ban of ostracism by the court, and they should only release the ban when he does teshuvah. In contrast, if the sage is alive, they will not release the ban until he asks the sage for forgiveness. To protect his honor, a sage may issue a ban of ostracism against a common person who acted outrageously against him. He does not need witnesses, nor must the offender have been warned. The ban is not lifted until he appeases the sage. If the sage dies, then 3 people may come and lift the ban. If the sage desires to forgive him and not place him under ban, he is permitted. So we're talking about a Torah sage who is completely transparent. It's not about himself. It's not about his ego. It's just about the word of Hashem. Even if there aren't witnesses, he alone would be able to put somebody under a ban of ostracism. If a teacher placed a person under a ban of ostracism because of his honor, all that teacher's students would be obligated to follow this ban, meaning not to have dealings with this person that was banned. If a student issued a ban, then that student's teacher would not have to uphold the ban, but others would. Similarly, when a person is placed under a ban of ostracism by the Nasi, the leader, then everybody would be obligated to follow that ban. However, if somebody of a lower stature put a Jew under ban, then the Nasi, the leader who is of higher caliber, would not have to follow the ban. When a person is placed under a ban of ostracism because of his city, then other cities need to follow the ban. But if somebody was placed under a ban by a different city, not his own city, then his own city would not have to follow the ban. Okay, finally, the Rambam lists 24 reasons, other reasons for a person to be placed under a ban of ostracism. Okay, but before we get to them, just one final clarification. When does the ban apply? When the ban was imposed because he acted disrespectfully to a Torah sage. However, a person who was placed under a ban of ostracism for another reason, for which such a ban may be declared, even if the ban was declared by a person of the lower stature in Israel, then everybody would be obliged to follow that ban and not have dealings with this person until he does teshuvah. And here are 24 reasons for a person to be placed under a ban of ostracism. A person who disgraces a sage, even after his passing, as we mentioned. A person who embarrasses a messenger of the court. A person who calls a colleague a slave. A person who was ordered to appear before the Beis Din and did not show up. A person who treats even one rabbinic law with disrespect, certainly if he disrespects Torah law. A person who refuses to comply with the decisions of the Beis Din. A person who possesses an entity that can cause damage, like a dangerous dog, a faulty ladder, could be placed under a ban until he removes that danger. A person who sells land to a non-Jew is under a ban until he accepts a responsibility, so should that non-Jew cause the Jew tsaros. So we have a system of a Beis Din. If a person sells his land to a non-Jew, then that non-Jew might not care about Torah law, and as a result might cause financial problems to his neighbors or to the neighborhood. Somebody who sells property to a non-Jew would, obviously today things are a little different with this, very different actually. But if a person did sell in a context where he shouldn't have, then he needs to accept responsibility of financial loss that will be caused to the neighborhood as a result. A person who testifies against a Jew in a secular court. So nowadays, the way it works is if a Jew wants to take another Jew to court, so first he has to take him to Beis Din. If the other person refuses to come to Beis Din, then the Beis Din will allow him to take him to court so that the court can enforce it. But the first stop always has to be Beis Din. A Jew is not allowed to take another Jew to a secular court until he first appears in Beis Din. A person who testifies against a Jewish colleague in a secular court and causes him loss is placed under a ban until he repays that loss. A butcher who is a Kohen and does not separate the special Kohen gifts, a person who violates the sanctity of the second day of Yom Tov, even though it's only a custom, a person who works after the afternoon before Pesach, a person who says Hashem's name in vain or takes oaths in Hashem's name casually, a person who causes many people to desecrate Hashem's name, a person who causes many people to eat sacrificial food. That's not relevant today until Mashiach comes hopefully very soon. A person who calculates the years and decides when to add or minus an extra month. This is supposed to be done by the Beis Din. He shouldn't be doing this by himself. A person who causes the blind to stumble. That's quite an important one. Can be placed under a ban of ostracism. A person who prevents the many from performing a mitzvah. Many people want to do a mitzvah and he's in the way. A butcher who sold non-kosher meat. A butcher who does not inspect his knife, meaning a sheichet, who does a slaughterer who doesn't inspect his knife before shechting to make sure that it is kosher. A person who intentionally causes himself to have an erection, meaning he makes himself literally have an erection which will lead him to act inappropriately. A person who divorces his wife and then enters into a partnership or business dealing with her, which requires them to come into contact. Once a person divorces his wife, he is not allowed to have dealings with her, as this could lead in the wrong direction. Business dealings. A sage whose reputation is unsavory, meaning even if he's a Talmud Chacham, a Torah sage, but if his reputation is bad, and a person who finally unnecessarily places somebody else under a ban of ostracism. Sorry that we've run over time. Thank you so much for joining us. Wishing you a wonderful evening. And yes, I will look at the chat and I'm open for questions.